So you're here because you really want to get to the heart of things, right? You want knowledge that sticks, maybe spark some real insights.
Well, you definitely come to the right place for that.
Yeah, we're doing a deep dive today, just for you, into some ideas that really might shift your perspective.
We are indeed. Today, we're looking into the world presented in the book Shrooms for Enlightenment, an extraordinary journey into the nature of reality.
Exactly. And this isn't, just dry theory. It's based on the author's own story, his personal journey.
Right, interwoven with some pretty deep philosophical and spiritual thinking.
All kicked off by his experiences with psilocybin mushrooms and what they might reveal about consciousness.
And our goal here, just to be clear, isn't to push any specific action. It's more about pulling out the key insights from this uh, very personal account.
What does the book suggest about psilocybin's potential for, say, personal breakthroughs? Or even maybe a wider shift in how we see things?
Yeah, it frames it as a potential tool, a catalyst maybe, but definitely not some magic bullet.
Okay, so let's dive right in. The author starts with his own awakening story. And he paints this picture of himself at 18
Mm-hmm.
as a, and I'm quoting here, skeptical, cocky frat boy.
Huh. Yeah, not exactly the archetype you'd picture for this kind of thing.
Not at all. So he goes out into the Austin Hills with some friends. They take mushrooms,
Expecting what? Just a fun time, maybe some laughs?
pretty much. But what happened was completely different, way more profound.
He talks about this huge shift in his senses almost immediately.
Yeah, like colors becoming incredibly vivid, the whole world seeming to like breathe and flow.
Even mundane things, like he mentions a beer can, suddenly felt sacred.
Exactly. And time got weird. A friend's cigarette seemed to burn for ages. What did these sensory shifts actually mean, though?
Well, it points towards perception changing fundamentally, but what's really key is that it went beyond just seeing weird stuff.
Yeah.
He talks about experiencing ego death
Right, that temporary dissolving of his sense of self, his I.
and feeling completely connected to everything instead. That loss of the usual boundaries, that's a really powerful glimpse beyond our normal sort of self-centered view.
And get this, he and his friends, all four of them, saw this silver disc in the sky.
Wow.
He even says, real or not, it didn't matter. The fact they all saw it was huge for him. What could that shared vision suggest?
It's fascinating. Maybe a brief connection to some kind of collective awareness,
Mhm.
or maybe it just shows how powerfully shared states of mind can influence perception. It blurs those individual lines,
After that, he wanders off alone, follows a butterfly.
right, into this shimmering tunnel of glowing orange leaves.
Yeah.
The imagery is incredible.
Totally. And then he sees this crystalline structure that looks like a blue diamond reflecting 100 fractals of divine intelligence. Just, wow.
So symbolic, so vivid,
And it doesn't stop there. He sees an apartment pool.
and experiences it as.
Consciousness in liquid form. Like it embraced him, merged with him, even loved him.
That's intense.
Yeah. And he wraps this part up by saying his whole identity shifted. He don't want to be that arrogant frat boy anymore.
He felt connected instead, and made a vow to remember that feeling of oneness.
So what's the takeaway from such a huge identity shift?
I think the main insight is how much our everyday identity is a construct.
Yeah.
Experiences like this can just pull that apart for a bit.
Revealing something deeper, more connected
Us.
underneath.
Exactly. Something that often feels more real, more authentic. He calls that first trip a sacred crack in the illusion.
The start of a new way of living, more awake. Which naturally makes you ask, what illusion is he talking about?
Perfect segue. That leads us right into the book's introduction. Why mushrooms? Why
Wow.
now?
And here, he taps into something I think a lot of people feel, that sense of being stuck.
Mm-hmm. Even if you're doing all the right things, spiritually speaking, meditating, reading, workshops.
But still feeling like you haven't quite broken through to that deeper connection or awakening.
Yeah, exactly. And the book puts forward this idea. Magic mushrooms, used intentionally, respectfully.
Can be like a system shock, a reboot for the mind.
That's the premise. A way to potentially break out of those default patterns, those ingrained ways of thinking and seeing that might be holding us back.
He's very clear, though, this isn't about partying or finding some easy fix.
No, not at all. He frames it more like a manual, maybe, for people genuinely seeking deeper awareness, but finding traditional methods aren't quite enough for them.
And he really stresses the need for emotional stability before even thinking about this. Why is that so vital?
Well, because these experiences can bring a lot of unconscious stuff bubbling up. Difficult emotions, old traumas.
Right. And without a solid footing, that could be overwhelming, even harmful.
Definitely. The intro also explains how psilocybin might work by temporarily dissolving or at least loosening
Yeah.
that ego structure.
That sense of me built on our beliefs, our roles, our history.
And when that loosens up, the book suggests we can have a more direct experience of unity, of a deeper truth, perhaps.
But he circles back to practicalities, saying the mushrooms are just a door. They aren't the destination.
Right. The real work, integrating any insights, that all happens after the experience.
Which brings us to chapter 1, the call of the mushroom.
Yeah, this chapter starts by describing that feeling spiritual seekers sometimes hit a plateau.
Where the practices that used to feel so meaningful just start feeling flat, routine.
Exactly. And he introduces this idea of the call of the mushroom like an inner nudge, a whisper, suggesting maybe there's another approach.
He's not dismissing traditional paths, is he?
No. He acknowledges their value, but he suggests some people might be so sort of stuck in their mental grooves that they need something more potent to shake things up, a catalyst.
What's your take on that idea? That some might need a more radical intervention?
It points to the reality that people are different. Conditioning runs deep for some. What works for one might not for another. For certain individuals, a powerful, direct experience can be the pattern interrupt they need.
To give them a new perspective to bring back to their regular practice?
Precisely. The chapter then goes into how our brains build identity, starting really young. Basically, by contrast, me versus you, this versus that.
Filtering reality, simplifying things so we can function.
Right. And this constant filtering and categorizing creates our reality tunnel, which solidifies into unconscious scripts and beliefs as we grow up.
And this filtering, he says, is where the ego comes from.
That's the idea. It serves a purpose, gives us boundaries, but it also creates separation and suffering by making us cling to these constructed identities.
So how does psilocybin fit into this, according to the book?
Well, the theory discussed is that in the right set and setting, it can temporarily dial down the activity in the default mode network, the DMN.
Which is the brain network linked to self-talk, mind-wandering, our sense of me.
Exactly. And when that quiets down, the inner narrator, that constant voice judging and commenting,
It can fade out.
yeah, potentially leading to more presence, maybe that feeling of unity, or sometimes confronting parts of ourselves we normally push away.
He makes a really important point, though. The ego comes back.
Oh, absolutely. It's not permanently gone. But maybe it's changed, like there's a crack in the wall.
A memory of yourself without all those layers.
Right. He frames the mushroom experience as providing insight, showing you the prison of your conditioning, societal stuff, beliefs, trauma.
But walking out of that prison, that's still on you.
Entirely. Which is why the emphasis on mushrooms as sacred medicine, not toys, is so strong. Respect, clear purpose, safe environment.
Especially given the risks for people who might be emotionally unstable or have lots of unprocessed trauma. Why is framing it as sacred medicine so key?
I think it shifts the whole perspective. It's not about escape. It's about potential transformation, approached mindfully, maybe even reverently.
Okay, yeah.
So the chapter concludes that, used properly, the mushroom can be like a mirror to that false or conditioned self.
Revealing the awareness underneath.
Exactly, that untouched presence. And this call he talks about, it's for those genuinely ready to question their own programming.
Okay, chapter 2 then moves into seeing through the illusion. How does it build on this?
It starts by digging into perception itself. How everything we experience is basically an interpretation made by our brain. What we think is reality is already filtered.
Which leads to Aldous Huxley's idea, right? The reducing valve.
Exactly. The brain isn't designed to let everything in that would be overwhelming. Its job is largely to filter reality down to what's useful for survival in our world, our society.
So what we call normal consciousness is actually this tiny sliver of what's possible, shaped by our biology, culture, personal history.
Pretty much. We're living inside a model, a useful simulation perhaps, but not the full territory.
But psychedelics, the book suggests, can temporarily open that valve wider.
That's the idea, leading to this perceptual reawakening. His examples are so vivid, trees rippling, surfaces breathing, colors glowing.
It's not like things become unreal, but maybe more real, hyper-real.
Or just perceived differently, revealing layers we usually miss. It suggests our everyday perception is pretty limited, maybe even a bit dull compared to what's possible.
He brings in Terence McKenna, too, about nature communicating through presence, not words.
Right, and how under psychedelics, the grip of language can loosen, allowing for more direct, unmediated experience. Less thinking about the tree, more just being with the tree.
And this direct experience, this being, is how the mushroom reveals truth.
According to the author, yes. It leads to realizing that our roles, our beliefs, they're temporary outfits, not our core self.
Which fosters that sense of being the observer, watching thoughts and feelings instead of being swept away by them.
Exactly. Leading to more clarity, more peace, which connects to so many spiritual traditions, doesn't it?
Totally. Mindfulness, Vedanta's witness consciousness, even mystical aspects of Christianity.
But the key point here is that psilocybin can make this a felt experience, not just an idea you read about. And that feeling can change everything.
So once you've glimpsed behind that veil of the separate self, even for a moment,
You carry that memory, and often a profound sense of love, described as like, the basic stuff is reality.
the chapter then brings in another McKenna idea, a pretty bold one.
Oh yeah, the stone ape theory, essentially. That maybe hallucinogenic mushrooms played a role in the evolution of human consciousness itself. Language, religion, culture.
Suggesting they could be catalysts, opening doors beyond just basic survival. It's a wild thought.
It is. The chapter also links these experiences to moving beyond lower chakra, concerns fear, appetite, sex, into the heart and higher centers, love, empathy, vision.
He connects it to the 1960s love generation and their shift in values, seeing the earth and humanity differently.
And Corona mentions Albert Hoffman, who discovered LSD, and his hope that these substances could help shift our worldview from materialism towards interconnectedness, oneness with nature.
It also brings in the context of indigenous use, right? Shamans using sacred plants as sacraments for guidance, healing.
Absolutely, providing that important historical and cultural grounding.
But again, the caution. These aren't toys. Misuse could lead to chaotic experiences.
Definitely. But used with intention, the potential for positive shifts is highlighted, like ethical recalibration. He gives the example of suddenly feeling empathy for animals and losing the desire to eat meat.
Wow, yeah. That's a concrete shift.
And the chapter wraps up with that beautiful chariot allegory from the Bhagavad Gita.
Body as chariots, senses as wild horses.
The mind is reins, intellect the charioteer, and the soul, the Atman, the passenger within.
And psychedelics can, what, calm the horses for a moment?
That's the metaphor. Interrupt the pull of the senses, create stillness, so the charioteer intellect can wake up and the passenger soul remembers who it truly is.
So the mushroom, the Gita, the shaman, all whispering the same thing.
Pretty much. You're the observer. Remembering that is where freedom begins.
Okay, so chapter 3 takes us to Leary's model of consciousness, and it tries to look past the counterculture caricature of Timothy Leary.
Right, focusing on his actual contributions to studying consciousness, especially his 8-circuit model.
Leary's big idea was that the brain isn't finished evolving, that consciousness can go way beyond just survival thinking.
Exactly. His 8 circuits are like different potential levels or modes of functioning, psychological, emotional, spiritual, activated by life, practice, or psychedelics.
And he thought most people operate mainly in the first 4 circuits: survival, social roles, ego, basic emotions.
Yeah, circuits largely shaped by, fear and cultural programming, our everyday operating system.
But he proposed these 4 higher circuits, often dormant, like detached observation, spiritual bliss, feeling connected to everything.
Transpersonal unity, even cosmic intelligence.
Hmm.
He saw these as the next evolutionary step for consciousness, alternative ways of being.
And LSD was his main tool for exploring these, initially at Harvard, as serious research.
Right. He saw people having these incredibly profound experiences, unity, divine light, forgiveness, overwhelming love.
And his key insight during that time was about
Set and setting.
Yeah.
Hugely important. Your mindset going in and the environment you're in.
Because psychedelics basically amplify whatever's already there.
Precisely. They magnify the internal state and the external context. This became fundamental for psychedelic ethics.
Moving them from just drugs to powerful tools needing preparation, guidance, integration.
Absolutely. Because without that care, the risks are real trauma resurfacing, potential for psychosis in vulnerable people, just general distress.
But with care, Leary saw potential for dissolving ego barriers, healing, activating those higher circuits.
His model was radical because it treated these higher states as natural, not as illness or delusion, which challenged mainstream psychiatry back then.
He was really interested in circuits 5 and 6, wasn't he? Witness consciousness, holistic perception.
Yeah, where you become the observer of your own mind, time feels different, intuition plays a bigger role alongside logic.
But not losing touch with reality, more like expanding the definition of reality.
Exactly, including meaning, sacredness, not just the material. Leary encouraged people to be their own explorers, psychonauts.
with LSD as a tool, a mirror, microscope, telescope demanding respect.
Yeah. Humility was key. So, despite all the controversy around him later,
His core message holds up, that the mind is vast. Psychedelics can be tools for exploring it.
I think so. The biggest revolution, he argued, was internal freeing thought, expanding awareness.
And the book emphasizes that psilocybin brings up these huge questions again about self, reality.
Questions that, once you really ask them, are hard to just put back in the box.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive into shrooms for enlightenment, we've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. From the author's own transformative first experience.
To the book's central idea, psilocybin, used intentionally as a potential lens on consciousness, a way to maybe shake loose old patterns.
We looked at that call of the mushroom for seekers feeling stuck, the idea of seeing through the illusion of our everyday filtered reality.
And Timothy Leary's quite mind-bending eight-circuit model of evolving consciousness.
Touching on really fundamental questions. What is reality? What is the ego? Can we awaken individually or collectively? And it's crucial to remember, as the book itself stresses, that while these ideas are fascinating, and hopefully our chat has been useful,
The actual journey of understanding, integrating anything like this, that's deeply personal.
it really is. It's an ongoing process.
So let's leave you with a final thought to chew on. The book talks about Huxley's reducing valve, how our brains filter reality.
Right, limiting our awareness.
Maybe consider how that idea applies to your own life. What kind of filters, assumptions, beliefs, maybe fears might be shaping your experience?
And just ponder. What might happen if you explored, even gently, lifting some of those filters? What new perspectives might open up about yourself and the world?